Ta-da. Thank you very much. Since you talked about the book, I will tell you that there are copies of this book back there. It's called Light in the Closet. It kind of, people talk about coming out of the closet, so I thought an appropriate name was Put a Light into the Closet, Shine a Light, which is why we have the little light there behind the closet door. And then the subtitle is Torah, Homosexuality and the Power to Change. Torah, for those who don't know, is the same thing as the Old Testament, a.k.a., as I put it, also known as. And also a.k.a. the Hebrew Bible. So, and what the book basically does, and I'm going to, in my talks today and tomorrow, I'm going to really try to summarize a couple of points from the book. I mean, as he said, it's a 600-page book, so I suspect I'll not be able to cover everything in the book. But what I'm going to do is, tonight, I'm going to talk more about the political climate of how we got to where we are today, and some of the cultural wounds that Richard spoke about that are coming through. And I'm going to give you, assuming it gets done, copies of an example of a booklet that is paid for by your taxpayer dollars, please note, by your taxpayer dollars, that is given out in the Massachusetts school system. And that's only one example of, and I'll go through many others, showing what your kids are being taught. And if you don't know what your kids are being taught, shame on you, is what I can tell you. So anyway, tonight I'm going to talk more about the cultural wounding and and some of the issues of understanding what I refer to as the homosexual activist agenda. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk more about the heart of the book, which is the biblical commandments. What does the Hebrew Bible really say about, for example, Leviticus 18:22, you know, that very famous or infamous Leviticus 18:22. What does it say about transgender? What does it say about incest, bestiality, sexual promiscuity, fornication, etc., etc. So I'm going to go through really a litany of all of the sexual commandments of the Bible and indicate what the commentary and what the real meanings of each of those phrases are, because unfortunately, most people really are unaware of what the true intent and meaning of a lot of these verses are. And I took 5 years going through not only the Bible, but the rabbinical commentary, something called the Talmud, which is the oral law, which we as traditional Jews believe was handed down as the oral explanation of what the Bible really says, handed down at Mount Sinai at the same time the 5 books of Moses were handed down. And then was written down subsequently when the Jews were exiled from Israel into Babylonia. And so the rabbis all said, oh my God, we got to write all this stuff down. And of course they then can't write anything simple, so it's 70 some odd volumes. And kind of pour through those volumes is very interesting. Anyway, so that's going to be the tomorrow morning speech. And then tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to go into, I call it mentoring the sexually broken. How do you help people come out? Because that's in the final analysis what people really care about. And Richard, I'm sure, is going to talk about that a little bit as well. And I'm sure we'll be complementing each other in terms of the material that we'll be talking about. Let me turn to the question of Jonah itself, because kind of an interesting story of how we called our organization Jonah, and why and what we do. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes on this. Basically, 10 years ago, my co-director, a woman named Elaine Burke, and myself decided to form an organization in the traditional Jewish world. It's not Messianic, it's in the traditional Jewish world, to try to help fill a huge gap. And my friend Richard Cohen back there said, you will be making history by doing this. And we did. We now are worldwide in scope. We actually are active in 12 different countries around the world. And what we decided, see, one of the things you got to understand is that Jews are prohibited from proselytizing. As opposed to the Christian faith and Muslim faith, we are prohibited from proselytizing. We are not allowed, the doctrines of our faith, to go out and try to convert people. It's a no-no. Therefore, since a lot of people know this, we get a lot of people coming in that came into our ministry saying, I want help, because I don't like all those ministries that are pushing down my throat their form of their religion. And you guys are just basically saying, hey, there's a master plan that God has created. there is a one God. There's many paths to get to that God. And you're not trying to push down your particular faith and your particular religion. And so what we found was a tremendous demand coming in from Christians, from Muslims, from Hindus, from a number of different faiths. And so what we did was we have Jonah as the kind of the parent organization, which is the outreach and educational arm. And then we have something called the Jonah Institute of Gender Affirmation, which is our clinical and research arm, which actually, I love to tell people this, we have 6 counselors in the group, 3 full-time counselors and 3 part-time counselors. And one is a psychiatrist and one is a psychologist, and we have a couple of social workers and a couple of life coaches and a couple of mentors. Religiously, we have 1 Orthodox Jew, we have 1 Catholic, we have 1 Mormon, 2 evangelicals, 1 Jehovah's Witness. Did I leave one out? I think I left one out. But then, and another religion. I can't remember which one it is now. But it's a very diversified group in order to show that, you know, as Jews, we have an obligation. We believe we're God's chosen people to shine a light unto the nations. Not to convert people, but to show people the way. And so, therefore, in terms of an interdenominational approach, what we basically do is have hired people to be the counselors who all have been there and done that. Every one of our counselors are ex-gays, or a term I really hate, but people who have come out of the life and transformed themselves. Okay, so let's talk about a few minutes about what Doug talked about when he first came up and what Richard talked about. You know, this belief that once gay, always gay. The belief that I'm born that way. How did society get that way? How did this get so prevalent? The American society actually, and Western European society, has been totally brainwashed without ever realizing how it has been manipulated to reach a predetermined group of people that have engineered a social sexual revolution. We've had a social sexual revolution in this country. In this process, today's culture has been purposely conditioned to arrive at a conclusion concerning sexuality that we all think it's our own. You know, the story we tell ourselves become our beliefs. And so what we've had is a setting where traditional morality has been undermined by a political correctness, where freedom of speech has basically been curtailed, viewpoint discrimination ascends more and more, homosexual culture and sexual permissiveness is now part of our mainstream culture. How did this all happen? It happened because of a very clever and very sustained campaign of manipulating and controlling the public discourse. That was the first step. The second step involved education, and I put that in quotation marks, education in our public school systems and in our universities. And the thing I'm going to give out is going to be an example of some of the education that is being given in the school system. I will speak tonight to both of those issues. Homosexual sex is now viewed in many circles as the exact equivalent of heterosexual sex, premised in large part by the acceptance of the born that way theory. Gallup polls show that in 1982, it's only 25 years ago, so this is not a lifetime ago, only 25 years ago, the Gallup poll showed that approximately 1/3 of Americans approved of homosexuality per se. 1/3. In 2001, i.e., 20 years later, more than 50% of the American public did so. These figures parallel the exact same Gallup polls showing an increasing belief in the genetic origins of homosexuality. Direct parallel. The more that they believe it's born that way, the more they approve of homosexuality. If you think back to the 19th century, you may recall that homosexuality was considered what? Sodomy. In the late 19th century, the word changed. It became homosexual. And that denoted a condition. During the 60s and the 70s, not so far back, in the 60s and the 70s, a generation ago, the word changed again. The word that Richard didn't want to say, G-A-Y, gay. It came to be used as the accepted term. Understand clearly the distinctions between these three terms. An act, sodomy, can be criminalized. A condition is something you can feel empathy for. But a identity, a full-fledged identity, gay, that represents who you are. That represents something irrevocable. Like you're a member of a racial group, or you're male, or you're female. The stakes change. Do you all understand the difference between these things of sodomy, homosexual, and gay? An act, a condition, and an identity. Very, very clear. Now, this did not happen by accident. In 1988, there was a war conference, as I like to refer to it, called by 175 gay pride extremists. And they laid the groundwork for this. This particular war conference accepted a masterful public relations campaign that was set forth by two brilliant PR strategists, one named Marshall Kirk and another guy named Hunter Madsen, both of whom were gay, both of whom were homosexual, both of whom were whatever term you want to use. Kirk and Madsen subsequently published their plan under the book title of After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Loathing of Gays in the 90s. Interesting title, isn't it? They set forth their intentions clearly and unequivocally, and I'm now going to quote from the book. They say the purpose of the book is for the next phase of the gay revolution through an unabashedly subjective and one-sided national propaganda effort. Their plan succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Let me take a few minutes to just list the 8 tactics or the 8 strategies that they laid out in the book. And I'm not going to go into much detail unless I really don't have the time. But believe me, I spell it out in here in detail. The first is they said, we must learn, we being now the homosexual community, we must communicate with others at their own level while curtailing our own self-expression. In other words, don't show people what gay sex is really all about. Just get out there and communicate with people at whatever level they're at.